next to just south of McCormick Place, we're competing with that area for the second headquarters of Amazon. So the people in the steel plants would love to have Amazon down there, but probably the Amazon people, if they're thinking of Chicago, they'd rather be near the lakefront and closer to the center of the city. We don't know. But the point is, I mean, all these considerations that you're raising are important to look at, but they illustrate as well the general point. Look at different Chicago neighborhoods and you can find the United Nations at work. That is, you can find Afghan neighborhoods, you can find, Croatian neighborhoods in Bridgeport. There's an active Croatian subcommunity, etc. Okay, so this is the big theme from Ken Tuckville Karaoke. Tuckville, Schumpeter, and the critical addition we make in the book is these can both come together through the arts and arts participation. That people can build a sense of bonding, integration, legitimacy through karaoke in Asia. And so karaoke is doing in Asia what the Baptist Church may do in Bronzeville. Okay. So if you ask people, are you a member of a Baptist church in Hong Kong? They say, no. But do you do karaoke? Oh yeah, sure. 3 times a week. Okay. All right. So this is a summary. Make it a little bigger. This is the theme. This is the sort of 3 models, which I'll start at the top. Okay, the top model is the classic Tuckville. Civic participation, citizen participation builds trust and legitimacy. It can be positive or it can be negative. That is, in Latin America, civic participation is low, and people say that's why there's such low trust in Latin America. Okay, model 3. There may be other things that are going on, new civic variations, family, work groups. These other factors may build trust and legitimacy instead of civic participation. So, karaoke maybe down here. Model 3, whoops, I want to make this a little smaller here. Model 4 is a negative sign. It may be that civic participation can undermine trust. How could that happen? What's an example that you think of? I gave you an answer to this a session or 2 back, but you think of it logically. So this is the finding among some Asians. That is, if the overall Asian answer in general, specifically Korea, is the more people participate, has no impact on trust and legitimacy. That means some are positive, but also some are negative. How can some be negative in Korea? And if you come back to Western Europe or the U.S., why might participation in some, think of the type of organizational participation. If you join it, what kind of organization might lead you to feel I have less trust in government, in the leadership, and people? Yeah.
Like a anti-establishment or like protest group?
Yes, exactly. For sure, a protest group. But how about more traditional organizations? You think of any? How about unions? So many unions. In the U.S., unions tend to be more focused on jobs, seniority, and pay. But around but sometimes here, but say in Greece, remember all the Greece riots, demonstrations, parades, those were mainly led by unions in Greece. So in much of Western Europe, the unions in Southern Europe, Western and Southern Europe, the unions are highly politicized. France, Spain, Italy, so forth. And clearly, if you're an active union member, you show up and you go in those marches, you're there passing out pamphlets, you're doing that, if you're a leader, you would think that might lead you to feel the establishment really wants to, beat us down. Okay? Whereas if you're just sort of marginal, not really very active, or you're not a union member, that might not have that impact on you. Okay, so the point is, the Asian finding gave us more insight into the West by thinking through the dynamics of how it might work and how it's not uniquely or specifically Asian. It also is happening here if we look more closely. Okay, important argument for comparing cities and comparing countries. All right, this is hard to read, I won't bother, but basically it's all the countries where we have changes in the degree of civic activity and cultural membership. And now we got a couple of examples from especially France, where we did a survey with the city of Paris put out a request for proposals of studying how to make neighborhoods more vital, how to increase vitality in neighborhoods, especially those immigrant neighborhoods where you had North Africans and Black Africans, basically, who were in public housing, where they had lots of riots, they were burning cars, they're fighting with the police. What could the city of Paris do that would transform neighborhood dynamics in ways that they could improve the city? So we did a 3-year project, published a book basically, and then we had a 2-year project with Seoul. Same thing with the mayor of Seoul. So basically, then in our own work and with students on PhDs like Hee-Sun Jung, we've compared Paris, Seoul, Chicago. Okay, so here's Paris. This is called the Beaubourg Center, the Georges Pompidou Center. Middle of Paris, they tore down some old buildings and they put this in deliberately to shock and say, you know, we are not traditional Paris. And there's what's in there? How many of you, who's visited? Yeah, okay, tell us what's in there.
The Modern Art Museum.
Modern Art Museum, what else? There are cafes, library. There may be 3 or 4, they're huge museum spaces. How's it different from the Louvre? Louvre has the Mona Lisa, the traditional art, up to the middle of the 19th century. But there's nothing after the middle of the 19th century there. That's over on the other side of the Seine. But here you've got cool, swinging, bohemian, transgressive, some of the Picasso stuff. And then they show films. Anybody been to a film in here? Yeah. What's the film like?
It was like ancient video from New York.
Okay, but did you have seats like this?
Yeah, it was just like this.
Ah, okay. Well, no. Where at least the places where I've been in the past, they don't have seats. They have mats. Everybody lies on the floor, so you can say hello to the people nearby and watch the film. Okay, it's a slightly different experience than that is, the films are different. The scene is different. The scene is anti-establishment in many respects. Okay, why am I talking about this? Because how many tourists does this attract? Visitors. Let me qualify. Tourists and local visitors. The numbers are larger per month than the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre combined. It's a massive scene, not only inside but also surrounding it. It's got cafes, boutiques, 24 hours, all kinds of, thousands of people. It's a very cool scene with lots of activity. And there's a book on it by Laurent Fleury, one of our collaborators. And, well, just one more quick point. It does not fit Bourdieu's interpretation of how culture works, in the sense that the people who participate the most actively are not the upper status people. There are many middle income, lower status people, and how that developed. And one quick answer is the Communist Party was critical. The cell groups of the Communist Party mobilized their supporters and said, "We're going to the museum tomorrow, show up." And then afterward, what did you learn at that session? So there was the structure of the party then, and that then got taken over through newsletters, through monitors, through clubs that would come and hold sessions here, even though the Communist Party may not have done it anymore. So these are some of the things behind the scenes that make the scene work. Okay, so this is the Just a couple of other examples. Here's the city of Paris downtown, and this is Greater Paris, not just downtown. Downtown is in the center. Just to first give you a quick snapshot of how these big suburban or exurban sort of neighborhoods are critical as well. Okay, so classic driver is rent, I think. No, this is income distribution. So this is who's rich. The green people are rich. Yellow people are poor. Okay, individual amenities summed in a simple index. A whole bunch of kinds of amenities. They're the largest in downtown Paris, just all kinds of things. But if you then look at glamour, glamour is pretty highly related is moderately highly related to income. If we think of the 15 scenes dimensions, that is are some of these things just money? The answer is glamour is substantially increased by money. But if you look at other things, that is the correlation across the three dimensions here of exhibitionism, glamour, and charisma in 4 countries, we find very different patterns. They're not all the same. The closest to that kind of everything is if you're hot, if you're rich, you're also glamorous, you're also whatever, is closest to being true in Spain. The opposite is true in Canada, and it's weaker in these relatively. This is 0.1. These are very weak relationships with income or wealth in the U.S. So Spain has got more of that, but even Spain, it's not. These are 0.5 correlations, 0.4, 0.5. You square that, that's about 25% of the variation. So 75% of Spanish glamour is not explained by income. Even though Spain generally has more of a Veblen-esque Bourdieu style, that the richer people are more glamorous, but only 25% is explained by income. Okay, and this is the same thing as shown in the bar chart. These are just the numbers. Okay. Other scenes dimensions vary considerably, like egalitarianism is stronger in these traditional blue collar areas to the north. Here's a new pattern that I talked about, bobo, which the French don't talk about David Brooks. They think clearly it's a French. These are 2 French words just put together, bohème and bourgeois. And so the French talk about this all the time. Certain neighborhoods, certain mayors, certain cities are bobo, others are bourgeois, others are bohemian, so forth. So these are by contrast, you go to Asia and you talk about bohemian. They'd never heard of bohemian in Asia. Bohemian is a Western concept. It doesn't fit with the Asians. Okay, so how and why these patterns change when we go to different contexts is very important for us to understand the scenes dynamics and the urban dynamics. If you go to Waco, Texas, maybe let's say El Paso, you don't tend to have a big bohemian Art Institute set of people the way you do in the Cubs, the Wrigley Field neighborhood of Chicago. So you've got big contextual variations here, and the bobos are very localized. They don't live all over Paris. They're concentrated in this particular neighborhood, which is really not the traditional downtown. It's not the high glamour. These are okay. Bobos constructed from multiple dimensions, and don't want to try to get into detail there, but basically, just as we talked about the bohemians, bobos we can analyze in the same way. And this came from our Parisian collaborators loved. I mean, the artistic style of the French, you can see, is coming out here. Pretty complicated to read. I won't try to explain it all, except to say this is what you can do with a program like ArcGIS. Okay, this is simpler. These are the components. That is, how do we do this stuff? How can we build up to those kinds of colors? this is what we start with. These are examples of the raw data for New York, Chicago, and LA. And these include, that is the highest, and this is more detail in the Scenescapes book, but just to show you, pizza restaurants, Baptist churches, bookstores. These are the #1 amenities in in the 3 biggest American cities. Make this just a little bigger here so you can see the cafes, Catholic churches. How about comparing Chicago, New York, and LA? Cook County has 763 Catholic churches. All 5 boroughs of New York have only 342. LA County has only 225. Big differences among the 3 biggest cities. Catholicism is Chicago. Very important for the political culture and a lot of other things that make this city's whole politics and economics different from New York and LA. Christian churches, non-denominational dance companies, Pentecost. So churches are major institutional amenities driving a lot of other things, which are ignored by many of the secular social scientists. These are important for citizens and people. Look at what they do, not just your past theories. Okay, so we take these, and so we've got all these numbers. We've got their street addresses. We've got their zip codes all over the U.S. and all over Korea, all over France, all over Spain, all over Poland. And we then say, how do cities work and how are they changing? So we map these amenities in different ways. So just take one which you probably have never seen in at least a social science class here before. This word, it's like a 4-letter word for social science. Don't talk about that stuff. Okay, maybe talk about maximizing utility, but not glamour. All right, there are a few economists who are working on the fashion industry, and they're looking at things like designer boutiques, nightclubs, VIP rooms, such as Elizabeth Currid, whose book is on the reading list. She spent a couple of years going to the nightclubs, talking to people, interviewing them afterward, trying to see who was doing what. And she looked at, okay, well, I won't go through too much detail. We'll talk about it maybe on Wednesday. But these are indicators of glamour. Movie openings, design schools, TV and movie production, art galleries, interior design firms, beauty salons, advertising firms, fine art dealers. Okay, and then negatively, warehouse stores, Bible stores. Okay. So, we have 15 dimensions, of which glamour is one. We create these scores, just very simple, 1 to 5, where if we take, say, a Baptist church, is a Baptist church essential for glamour? Is it desirable? Is it neutral? Is it undesirable or antithetical? Okay, we do that for all of these hundreds and hundreds of amenities, like Baptist churches or McDonald's or Starbucks, and we score them just 1 to 5 in this way on all of the 15 dimensions. And in that way, we can create. So this is we can call a transformational matrix. How we get sort of the linguistic idea of transformational or linguistic analysis. How do we get from these 15 dimensions down the side to the more classic ideal types like Disney Heaven, Renoir's Loge, or say a bohemian neighborhood? That is, we can go from these more general dimensions to the more specific and this is the same thing I showed you in the case of Bohemia before. It's just blown up for all of these dimensions to show it's a general logic that you can pursue. This is the same basic thing. Okay, then what are the associations with Bohemia if we look at it this way? You can do a regression analysis and say, if we look at all the zip codes in the U.S., like I mentioned, Bridgeport is getting more Bohemian, which places have higher versus lower scores, And what are the variables which predict or are associated with a higher Bohemian score? And these include, let me make it a little bigger over here. Things like young people, lower income, more change perhaps, a larger proportion of non-whites, fewer retirees, etc. That is, we can, but presidential voting, not much difference. Okay, that is, but the classic Bohemians are simply not very politically engaged, in the U.S. at least in this way. This is for international purposes. I don't want to have discussion in a minute here, but just to wind up, how can we add international comparisons when we do these same things more explicitly? So we contrast three kinds of political culture here: the new political culture, class politics, and clientelism. We have the cultural traditions of Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox Christian, and Buddhist, Eastern religions. Then the point is these interact with, and these scenes-like characteristics transform the workings of the normal income, education, occupation, race, age, gender, in how they affect. In this case, we're focused. And this was this is the last chapter of Kentuckville Karaoke. We focused on not just voting, that is, these are broadly democratic processes. So China is high on a number of these, even though China may not have presidential voting. This includes protest, social trust, trust in political institutions, being civically engaged, following a sense of duty, solidarity, identity politics, civic activities, and voting. So all of these are separately measured and separately analyzed in citizen-level surveys. Okay, so the point is, the scenes are often not something you want to say causes democracy or causes voting, but scenes transform the working of other things which are there as well. So the way we diagram that, this is called an interaction effect. And we draw an arrow to another path and say, if we have this here, this scene characteristic changes the way that income operates. Okay, so this is a more concrete example of the same logic. What's the difference between, say, a town, a zip code with a high-tech factory or high-tech sets of offices, but it may be next to an industrial park or out in a cornfield, or versus one which is in the hot area of Silicon Valley, or maybe in even, let's say, Greenwich Village, or let's say, we're talking about Amazon. You know, Amazon is looking at downtown Chicago. Once they started, Google and Yahoo and others, Facebook, where are they expanding to? New York, Chicago, London. Cheaper, interesting, bohemian neighborhoods in the bigger cities are getting so Amazon is building a second headquarters, and Boston and Chicago are now considered two of the leading candidates, rather than Seattle, which is just not quite as hot a place as others. Okay, so the point of this is you can have the tech industry, you can have the number of engineers, the number of jobs in engineering, the number of people working for Google, and that may be a factor. But then if you want to explain local economic development, jobs, population, patents, and more people moving there who are also highly educated, what drives this sort of post-industrial growth? The answer is the technology is working, but so does the scene. And if you have a scene where there's more self-expression, where you have more cafes, where you have nightclubs, that is, you voted not to go to North Dakota. You want to be in a scene more like the things which are there, so that if you want to work for Google in Chicago, you may, that is, there are more people with talent like you who are attracted by the job and the scene, and the combination of them is what has a much bigger impact than any of those alone. So it's the combination of the scene with the other things that we're capturing. That's the big point. That's the point of these circle around the arrow showing combination, interaction, synergy. Okay. Finally, voting seems. Whoops! Oh my God! We're at the end of the hour. So we're going to talk. We're going to discuss more on Thursday. So I'm going to end up. Sorry, I didn't mean to lecture this much, but I'm giving you some of them, and then you can then maybe led to read a little bit, and we'll discuss more on, as I said, Wednesday. Scenes in voting. The voting, the Bobos change the vote. So people who are high income and Bobo vote more Democrat. So all the people in Hollywood vote Democrat. Not because they're poor, they're very, very rich. But they have a more bohemian political style than do people in Iowa or Wisconsin or, let's say, North Dakota. Yeah.
So, sorry, really quickly. So initially you introduced this idea, like that group affiliation goes down, solidarity goes down, civic engagement also goes down, and we're in a political crisis. But that's not true because there's a higher rate of group affiliation in the arts. But how do we know that that also means that solidarity is not declining, is also going up, or remaining consistent with arts affiliations? Because it seems like there's a lot of these institutions that count as group affiliation and count as participation in those spaces, but don't necessarily connect to political solidarity or have connections to civic engagement.
Yeah. I would agree with you and say it depends on the group and its program or its ideology. Yes. And with the example of, that was your example. You can have a protest group, and that ought to lead people, so people may be more active, but they may become more angry as they protest more and as they work more with their fellow. Okay, let's discuss. A lot of discussion on Wednesday, and read on and along these themes. Thank you.